So do we have questions from the floor, please? What would you like to ask Victor or David or myself in relation to our topics that we've been covering today? Any questions from the floor? Yes?
I'm just wondering what the take is on, I guess, the rise of economic nationalism and some of the populist movements around. Do you see that as possibly derailing the optimistic outlook?
This is the group that has suffered worst in what has been generally an enormously good, almost 40 years for the world now. It really dates to the back to 1978 and Deng Xiaoping's decision to open up China. There's a graph that an economist called Branko Milankovic draws about who's done well and who's done badly in the world. It's called the elephant graph because it's shaped, let me just see if I can draw it backwards. It's shaped like this. So this is the low income end of the spectrum. This is the high income end of the spectrum, the entire world population. The people who are lowest in income have actually done pretty well. In the people on middle incomes, people in places like Iran, Algeria, they've done fine. But when you get to, say, a factory worker in Peoria, they're some of the people who have suffered in this incidence of globalisation. So on average, those sort of people, low wage, often male workers, without a lot of skills, in the United States or France or Australia, this is the group who are the sag in the elephant's trunk. They haven't done so well. And then, of course, the people at the top, everywhere, have done terrifically well. China has now more billionaires than the United States. If you're in the 1% of the world population distribution, you've done pretty well. If you're in the 0.1%, you've done, I can't reach that high. Now, they've done terrifically well. But that group who are the sag in the elephant's trunk, they're the group that we need to worry about.
I think there's opportunity. As I said, I worked up and down North and South America during the GFC. And there's always someone who needs to spend some money. There's always someone who's got to procure something. There's always someone who has to build a new plant. So even if Trump goes ahead with steel sanctions and there's some change in the trade patterns, there's an opportunity for us. And I saw remarkable changes. I went in Brazil, I went to a favela with the administrator of the favela, and we walked through. And he was a bit surprised that I wanted to ask the people why they were in the favela. And what was really interesting about favela life in Brazil is most of the people are on the way up. They've come from some appalling village in the Amazon where there's no running water, there's no toilets. The kids, every morning have dysentery or the like. 25% of the kids die by the age of 5. So to go to a favela, have some running water, have some sewage, have an electricity, earn your living by recycling is extraordinary. And I think we're just seeing that globally, from Africa to Asia to Latin America, the extraordinary opportunity. And for us as Australians, they see us as the model. My clear message from Brazil was they want to be like Australia. They want to be a resources economy that's egalitarian. And that's what we offer. We offer people the dream. So you, both as a writer, as a publicist, as a journalist, the opportunities have never been greater for you and for everyone else in this room.
What is the top takeaway that we can take to our teams and those around us to improve on their optimism and I guess get through those tougher times that we do have in sales?
For me, the easiest thing would be to start every sales meeting by not asking people how are things going, but actually use, many of you will have read Martin Seligman and his work on positive psychology, but if you haven't, a really good book to read is a book called Flourish by Martin Seligman. He would say, open the meeting by going round the room with a positive question. What's the best thing that happened in sales for you this week? Or even the more general question, what's the best thing? I was actually wrestling with this question with an MBA class at RMIT on Saturday, and one guy had a really happy sales team except for one morose person. At every meeting, she dragged them down. Now, his decision has got to be she's either got to shape up or get out. But I think that the clearest message I would have would be to start off with optimistic questions. And the sort of thing I do to every sales clerk I deal with these days. And I get the question, not too bad. I ask the next question. So I think that's a start. Happy to talk, and Sue's got some marvellous strategies around this, but the optimistic, the open, and for you to open with optimism. You know, tell a little anecdote about something that happened that week. One of the anecdotes I often tell is during the G20, we had a meeting in Cairns. Now, those who run a conference in Cairns will know it's the worst place to do a conference for high echelon people. There's not enough planes with business seats, the hotels are crappy. You know, you go just north, they're okay, but in Cairns, it's horrible. But anyway, we had the bankers here will know the sort of people we had. You know, Deutsche Bank, the chairman of JP Morgan. And the day before the conference, I'm walking in the street and there's these two street cleaners, you know, with those little claws picking up papers. And I went up to one of them and said, look, I work for the Treasurer, Joe Hockey, and I just want to thank you for what you're doing. And this guy was burnt black by the sun. He had about 5 teeth. And he looks at me and says, you tell Joe she'll be schmick. What leadership? You know, it inspired me. And here is a guy proud in his work, leading at what we think is a menial level. So sharing even that sort of story with your team, I think is important. But it's to change the rhetoric. You know, exactly as David did. You know, we were all expecting the usual economists, oh my God, there's uncertainty and risk, instead of the glorious, inspiring story that we had from David.
Do you think we are culturally predisposed to not being optimistic?
It's a really interesting question. I was really lucky. You know, I published this book in December, and in January, Bill Gates edited Time magazine and called it the Optimist's Edition. And the editor of Time magazine interviewed him for the story. And her opening line was, we miss a lot of good news. You know, your 146,000 people a day coming out of global poverty, or, you know, the research on ovarian cancer just down the road in Melbourne is saving 100,000 women's lives a year. So that's not the sort of the headline. In the book, there's in fact, I have a chapter that says switch off the news. And I'll give you another anecdote. You know, the weekend of the Tennis Open, who watched the women's final? It was fantastic. You had 2 women in their mid-20s, neither of them had ever won a championship, slugging it out for 3 sets. And it happened in Melbourne, and it was the Australian trophy. Now, I broke my own rule that morning, and I switched on the news at 5:30. First item, suicide bombing in Kabul. Second item, suicide bombing in Baghdad. Third item, police shootout in São Paulo. Well, there's 6 shootouts in São Paulo every day. You know what? Why was it a story? And for me, I just thought it was bizarre. I'd actually been to dinner with the editor of ABC News a week before, and she's a lovely person. And I'm thinking, what Jekyll and Hyde monster is she that she wants to ruin our Sunday mornings? Because, you know, okay, we've got soldiers in Kabul, maybe item number 8 or 9, it's relevant to us. Suicide bombing in Baghdad, maybe not so much. A shootout in São Paulo being ahead of the Australian Tennis Open news is just bizarre. So I now have a rule that I don't read the news before 9 o'clock. I read my clippings on optimism and leadership. I either, as Jeff knows, I either tweet on the sunrise or I tweet with a quote on optimism. And so I just slow down the reading of news to 2 or 3 times a day, but not to start my day with it, you know. You don't need to start the day with bad news. So I think there is a disconnect between the culture of the newsroom, which is now taught at RMIT and Melbourne and Monash, and lead item is if it bleeds, it leads, and bad news sells. I think we as human beings say we don't want these people to curate our news. And one of my little projects I've set myself is to go and visit each one of these editors and ask them why they make these choices, why a suicide bombing or a shootout needs to lead against some great sporting event in Melbourne in which 2 women of courage have fought it out.
I'd like to add to that, but from a scientific, biological standpoint. I'm putting together a book actually around the Selling Better Manifesto, which I hope to have out later this year, but to underpin and support it from a biological, anthropological, sociological and economic perspective. So it's not just some wish that I have. Because what's really interesting about us as human beings, when you look at little children, little babies, you know the picture of the little girl that I had up in my presentation, we are actually biologically born to actually be helpful, to be curious, and we want fairness. So there's experiments done with little babies of 12, 18 months, years of age, and if you walked into a room with your arms filled with something and they didn't know who you were, and you started to drop something or tried to open a door, these little children would actually try and help you. So it's actually biologically hardwired in us to help and to support each other and to have fairness. Now, of course, as we grow, you know, there are challenges, and as parents, all of us who are parents here know that we also have to teach our children that there are certain dangers out there. So our brains are hardwired, priority-wise, for risk, because it's life-saving. So we have this kind of mash-up that we have to try and wrestle with every day, which is on one hand we want to get out there and explore and be curious and create and innovate and all the things I put up that Maria Montessori says about our human endeavour. But we also have to manage our risks so we don't get killed in the process. And that makes kind of, you have to find that nice harmony and balance there as well. So I think what I would like to encourage everyone to think about is I always like to look for evidence. As I read something the other week, good policy is based on facts, bad policy is based on ideology. And I always like to look at the evidence, because if someone says something to me, are they saying it for effect or fact? If they're saying it for effect, I should ask more questions and find out what that really means and look for the evidence. If they're saying it for fact, and it may be bad news for fact, fair enough, take it into account, think about it as part of the broader system. How can I make better decisions based on this evidence and information so we can keep moving forward and flourishing, as is the want for our human endeavour? So a saying we have at Barrett, and I'm happy to share it with you, is watch who you let near your mind. And make sure that you look at it from a perspective of fact and evidence to make more informed decisions rather than reacting to sort of the buffering that we get from whether it's the news cycle or someone who's being doom and gloom in a meeting. I won't accept it unless you have a proper case and argument for it. We live in a world and a sea of opinion. An opinion means nothing. An argument is a well thought through, evidence-based approach. You don't have to agree with it, but it provides you with substance that we can work with. So I'm appealing to all of us not to, because we get tired and overwhelmed and we just grab at that thing and go, yes, that's the reason. Because remember, in a world of complexity, we want simplicity to make life easier because we don't have to think about it too much. But that doesn't help us if those things that we are grasping with actually cause us to feel worse than what is actually around us. That's how I would start to think about this as well. Any other questions or comments from the floor before we finish up?
We have a response from the school children.
I don't know. Do we have a response from the school children?
No pressure. You want to say one thing?
Anything?
No, they'll do it later.
That's okay. Bailey, where are you? Where is she down there? Anything? No, okay, I will work on them later, okay, just saying. All right. Well, with that, I want to thank all of you for giving up your time to be here this morning. I want to especially thank Victor and David for their enlightening, informative, evidence-based presentations to allow us to see the world in a very positive, constructive way moving forward. Would you at least join me in thanking them very much? Thank you, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure. But I cannot leave it at that. What can you do from today moving forward? What can you start with and how can you sell better? Well, we have 4 initiatives. I'm sure you have others. You can join the Selling Better movement and help us champion this approach, this philosophy into the 21st century. You can also implement a Selling Better operating system, the model I showed you earlier on. You can undertake the Purposeful Optimism project that Victor and I are moving forward on and helping bring to business. And you can also participate in the 100 Sales Leaders project. Victor and I are wanting to actually not just interview leaders now in Australia, but we are now after sales leaders. We want to build out the 100 Sales Leader project, and some of you are already in the room, so we'll be tapping you on the shoulder to be part of this project. But any other great sales leaders that you know, we would love to invite them to be part of that. So I have forgotten, but firstly, as is our wont, Victor, thank you very much, my darling. Thank you so much. And David, to you as well. It's our absolute privilege. Thank you very much. I think we're awesome. It's 9:15. We are on time. I'm so happy. As you know, Selling Better movement is about consciously reclaiming and practicing the true essence of selling. And so, go out and sell better. Thank you very much for being part of our event. We look forward to seeing you. Very much.